CFO and Human Resources, perfect together. Brought to you by CFO On Demand from Fitzpatrick, Bongiovanni, and Kelly CPA. Please support our sponsors. This month's sponsor is Hafetz and Associates, and we'll be hearing from them later on in the presentation. Welcome, my name is Lou Bongiovanni, and I'll be your presenter today. I am the head of the CFO On Demand department of our firm. Okay, the things we'll be talking about in today's webinar. Here are our objectives. What's the benefits of combining the accounting and HR departments? When is it best to combine HR and accounting departments? And the 7 steps to combining accounting and HR departments. One survey from Robert Half Associates indicates that 1/5 of 1,400 CFOs surveyed have taken on HR duties in the past 3 years. So roughly 20% has taken on HR responsibilities. This trend has increased steadily since 2008's recession. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. A little background on combining the accounting and HR department. This trend is happening more and more, and that's why we thought a webinar on it was important to have and bring this point out to growing businesses here. The 2008 recession was somewhat of a game changer in many ways for small and especially larger companies, right? That emphasized the importance that these two departments had to work together, where before they're very comfortable working in their own different silos, where one was more numbers driven and the other one was more people driven. Well, clearly those two worlds came crashing together with the recession. The first reaction to the recession was cost cutting. How do we limit our costs, our overhead, in order to deal with the fact that revenue was shrinking so dramatically? And that happened between the years 2008, when the recession hit, all the way up to 2015. There were still remnants of it, depending on what industry you were in. Then in 2016, the tables started turning. The economy started to rebound. There was a different sense as far as the government's approach to it. A new administration ushered in more of a business-minded political climate. And all of a sudden, the labor market went from being a major surplus there and unemployment rates going high to now the lowest in about 40 years as far as unemployment. So there's been a clear shifting. So there has been a dramatic turn of events over the last 10 years, again, pointing to the reasons that these two departments need to work especially well together. So before it was labor surplus, now we get into a labor shortage, where cost cutting now turns into cost spending. But these two departments are diametrically opposed and have been for years, and that brings the challenge on combining the two, right? The accounting department views employees as costs, and HR looks at them more as assets historically. Now, I think those lines have now merged and now have not been so pronounced, and both sides are seeing the benefits of each other's approach to things. But clearly, the benefits of training and the perks that are difficult to demonstrate as far as any return on investment are the challenges for the accounting department to really understand how HR benefits a company. And on the HR side, the accounting side is perceived as cold, robotic in a sense, and where HR is seen more as the warm and fuzzy side of things. So the two worlds clearly come from two different angles as it relates to employees of a business. So the thought at first would be, well, why would you combine these two departments, since they just, they seem so philosophically different? But because they need to work together, what was found is that putting them together and appreciating their two different perspectives and getting the best of both perspectives here is the best thing that you can do for a growing company. Obviously, a company of just a handful of employees that's going to stay that size, this isn't really an issue. The HR department could be someone's part-time responsibilities. But as companies grow, and we'll talk about some of those, the sizes that at least we're finding where this is needed. But as a company grows, this becomes more and more of an issue. All right. So what's the common ground? Why does it make sense to put this together? I kind of pointed out some reasons why you wouldn't put these two groups together, but where are there common ground to work with? Well, one is that they both understand the importance of the employee to the company's success and culture. Both are compliance and process focused. They are on the accounting side. They understand there are certain rules and parameters, whether it's finance based or accounting rules that they have to follow. And clearly on the HR side, there is plenty of compliance that needs to be documented. So they both understand the importance of managing their work in that methodology. And both need to constantly leverage technology to support the employees. So there is some common ground that they have inherently, although philosophically they can be very different. So what are the benefits of combining the accounting and the HR department? Well, cost effectiveness is one. So in a cost effective manner, to have both departments for a mid-sized company in a competitive labor market makes complete sense here. When you're having these smaller companies that are becoming mid-sized companies and they understand that they need to attract high-level talent, it's important to have these two departments represented here, where maybe they're not big enough to have them separate. They do need a representation of both departments in the company. So having them combined, at least in certain stages of a company's growth, makes complete sense. Second bullet point is able to qualitatively and quantitatively assess employees within one department, as opposed to when you have larger companies, it's just not practical to have them combined. But with smaller, mid-sized companies, having the ability to assess through metrics how profitable, let's say, an employee is, as well as how effective they are at their job through customer surveys and such, is nice to have that all in one place. And lastly, the opportunity to work collaboratively to resolve employee cost challenges. Clearly, benefits, healthcare comes to mind as one of the driving ones, and they're escalating costs. It's nice to have both sides chime in on how we offer benefits such as healthcare or retirement benefits and keeping them in a cost-effective manner and having that discussion all happen within one department. So there are the benefits of combined departments, and that's why you're seeing this happening in a prevalent basis with many mid-sized companies. I really like this common anecdote here with a CFO of a company asked the CEO, "What if we invest in our people and they leave?" To which the CEO responds, "What if we don't and they stay?" That's really a great indication of the viewpoint of different leaders in a company and how they view the whole HR aspect of it and the cost side of it versus the benefit. A lot of times it's just hard to quantify, but I really like that exchange. So when is it best to combine departments? Now, I'm going to look at this from a growing company's perspective here, because most of the companies that we deal with are ones that are going from smaller than 50 employees and then growing up to the 100, the 200, 250. We have some with 500 employees as well. So they're the companies that really we're focusing on. So most of these discussions happen when you have a smaller company that doesn't formally offer an HR department, and now they want to introduce it, but the company's not big enough, at least in the early stages, to have a full-blown separate department or dedicated individual with it. So that's kind of what we're focusing on here. So usually what we find, if you have 50 or less employees of a company, usually we find that the company outsources their HR function. They there's no need to have someone dedicated in the company with employee size of that. So they might have a person who's doing a dual role, leads the HR directive in the company, but not full time, and usually leans on outsourcing of it. Many outsourcing companies are payroll companies. So whether it's the ADP or the Paychecks of the world, they have a rather established HR arm that's there to support with employee manuals, with helping with different compliance issues there. Next, you see development of an HR, I'll call it sub-department, or that's where they're merging departments with the accounting department as part of the accounting department when they reach about 50 employee threshold. So once you hit the 50 plus employees, you're seeing the need to have more of an HR presence in-house there because issues are arising with more frequency. And since the accounting department's already established there, when you look at the different departments within a company, the accounting department is the logical place to house this growing HR department. So I kind of call it a sub-department within it. Then, as the employee count reaches 250 and then starts climbing up from there, that's when we're seeing a full-blown separate HR department happening. You having a dedicated person, maybe that person eventually needs an assistant, and then that department starts breaking off. So depending on where you're at in this employee count, this is what we typically see. And obviously, there's other factors that come into play, but these are just general guidelines of when it makes sense to start looking at it. So if you're at a company where you're 50 plus employees, this is really what we're focusing on because that's the time when they start introducing a presence as far as HR responsibilities under the controller or CFO of the company. And then we kind of talked about just kind of a follow-up as far as when it's best to do that. That was from an employee count, but also just from a need. So when the employee benefits when employee benefits and issues require more than 30 hours per week of someone's time, that's when you start having the pinch where you're feeling, hey, we need to start hiring a dedicated person to address these matters there. Another factor that comes into play for sure is the employee mix and the turnover of the number of employees. Do you have a lot of seasonal employees? Do you have temporary employees that come in? So the mix of that number also comes into play because that'll speak to the turnover, the volatility of it, which of course, when you have a lot of turnover, there's a lot more HR needs there because you're signing up people, you're terminating people. There are different issues that come into play. So that's what might strain some of my initial parameters as far as number of employees because these functions need to come into consideration as well. Okay, so let's focus on the 7 steps to combining the accounting and the HR department. Number 1 is select and train the joint department head. So if you're now bringing in the HR department under the accounting department, because the HR department is just really growing, it doesn't need to be out there on its own, you want to select a head. There needs to be someone who takes ownership of this department. The logical person is the CEO. CFO of the company. This person has all the accounting responsibilities already under their purview here, and now you're going to add to that is the HR responsibility. Clearly, if the CFO doesn't have any previous HR experience or has limited HR experience, they're going to need to be trained in order to be the department head. Now, many times they won't know all the nuances of the HR rules because there are many of them, and this person is probably more schooled on the accounting nuances there. But it's important that they understand what the main HR issues are as it relates to the companies and where to find the information, whether it's outsourced or in-source. So that's providing internal and outsourced resources. Since the laws change very frequently, in the HR world, that they know at least to be able to identify the issues and then drill down more so with their internal staff or their outsourced staff. So the first place you need to do is you need to get a leader or a champion of that combined HR and accounting department, and the CFO person is by far the best candidate. Next, you want to establish department budgets. Many people who are developing this administrative department, so you already have your accounting department, which is administrative. Now you're bringing on an HR addition to it. There are many times the CEO doesn't give the department the amount of attention and resources it needs, and they tend to skimp on it, meaning the level of employee there or the amount of resources that are needed, because they kind of see HR as a necessary evil. It's there if there's a issue to address, and that's really not the way that you want to approach it. You want to approach it where it's there to add a benefit and to support the employees, not so much as being there as a necessary evil. So there's a temptation to skimp on the costs and developing the department. And I would strongly suggest that you want to build it not for the size that your company is now, but where you think it's going to be in, let's say, the next year or so. So if you're just touching 50 employees, and that's also a good parameter because there's a lot of healthcare related laws through Obamacare that trigger at that point. Knowing that your company might grow to 60 employees, let's say in the next 6 months or so, you want to be able to be ahead of that curve. You don't want to just grow to the number you are now. Clearly, you want to establish budgets for that department, and understanding that there are employee costs that you'll need to, that's obvious that'll come into play, as well as compliance costs, such as training and the resources you need to support these employees. So this department does need some resources there and a budget of its own in order to be effective. And that's kind of a new area there, and many owners are so revenue driven, they don't see a good return on this investment. So it's a hard sell for sure, but you want to try your best to dedicate some real dollars to this department. Next, the third step is develop employee metrics and benchmarks. Because you're incorporating this into an accounting department, you're going to have accounting staff that you're going to ask to help administer this HR department. So you want to lean heavily on employee metrics to measure the effectiveness of an employee, not just their efficiencies here. So, metrics are good with measuring tasks that are easily quantifiable, but there's also qualitative metrics that need to be used as well. Having the access to industry benchmarks as a guide is great, and I do emphasize it should be a guide and not the law. Like many times people use industry benchmarks as a weapon, as far as if they don't like an employee, they'll throw certain benchmarks at them, but if they do, they'll be a little laxed with it. You have to make sure that you're armed with the right benchmarks that are appropriate. Some will be internal, comparing yourself to your company when, let's say, it was more profitable, and some might be external. You want to also identify employees who are overachievers and pay them accordingly. There's also benchmarks as far as how much an employee should be paid. But this employee is a superstar, and you can liken that to a super athlete, where a LeBron James is a basketball player who's a forward on a basketball team, but he's not paid the same as most of the other forwards because he's a top producer and he really is an exceptional player. So you want to pay him as such, or a Mike Trout, more local guy there. So that being the case, you need to identify that these are guidelines, but there are certain key people who fall outside of these guidelines, and they should be recognized and rewarded accordingly. Number 4, develop the process. The accounting department is is accustomed to having processes, right? There's a month-end close, so there's certain procedures that need to be done, or the year-end close, or if there's particular transactions, they happen a certain way. So you already have that department that's very disciplined in processes here. So now you're going to introduce new processes to um, to the accounting department staff as needed in order to stay in compliance on the HR side. And because this is a new set of rules that they'll be dealing with, you want to make sure that they know the rules and where to get updates from it, and they stay current with them. So again, this is part of the investment in the resources that's needed to incorporate the HR department in the accounting department. Here's one of the challenges that we find with it. People issues are often messier than finance issues by far, right? When you have a question in the accounting department or a problem, it's usually resolved by analysis, a calculation. You get a right answer or pretty close to a right answer, and there's many times a wrong answer with it. Well, in the HR, that's not usually the case. It's not often that clear cut, and usually when you get to a resolution, it's probably not the perfect resolution. It's hard to say until it's after the fact whether that was a right or wrong approach to things. So a lot of times the accounting department doesn't feel that sense of fulfillment when addressing HR issues because they are messy and they aren't always cleanly and timely resolved. That is a cultural change as the accounting and the HR department try to be effective in their roles. You want to educate the employees who are benefiting from this HR department on the process continuously. So when there, for example, is a dispute, there's a certain way of presenting that dispute to the company, whether you're going through the chain of command. So maybe they need to, the protocol is, did they talk to their supervisor about, let's say one employee's having a problem with a coworker. Did they go through their supervisor? Did the supervisor document? Did they try to resolve it? Then did they, if that needs to escalate, did it go through the next chain, and then eventually did there need to be something written up, and then the process go through the proper chain. So it's those kind of things that need to educate the employees, because the accounting department usually wants to, they're accustomed to saying, okay, here's a request, I want to resolve it right here on the spot, and we move on. Many times that's not as efficiently done in the HR world, and that's a big adjustment for the accounting department to make. So those challenges just need to be acknowledged and addressed. And many times you want to, in the early stages, try to get a person dedicated to doing the HR function and not the whole department. Just try to contain it to one or maybe two people doing it. Step number 5, you want to leverage technology as best you can. You want to automate the quantitative parts of the assessment and compliance process. So there's going to be certain metrics that each employee will have as far as how many widgets they make if you're in production, or how many customer calls that you address if you're in service. There's going to be different metrics for depending on what the level of the employee is. Those things you can leverage with technology and quantify. The problem is, and this is my second bullet point, many in the accounting department don't know where to have technology kind of take a back seat and the more people side of it take a front seat. And that's the challenge in the accounting department, because when you're dealing with more qualitative matters, it's not appropriate to throw so much technology there. That's where it takes eyeball to eyeball, face to face things, and that's where things tend to get messier and less efficient. But that's really important that that those matters that are more qualitative in nature get addressed with the human touch and not through automation at it. So that's really what the challenge is. On the accounting side, that's rarely the case. You want to throw as much technology at it because you're crunching numbers, you're analyzing, and then there spits out a recommendation or a couple of different options, and then the human side kicks in usually at the end to present. That's not always the case in HR, and that balance is a challenge for people in the accounting department as the two departments merge. You want to educate and encourage employees to use the technology to improve the experience. So again, you want to use technology when it needs to be, and use the human side when it needs to be done as well. And a lot of times that just takes time to train employees, and especially if there's a lot of turnover, that training's happening continuously. And as much as that is not very efficient, that really does enhance the employee experience at the company. Number 6, and we kind of touched on this, communication. And I say know both languages here. There's clearly an accounting vernacular and an HR vernacular as it comes to dealing with employees and dealing with different departments within each of these two industries. Especially in HR, it's not what you say, but it's how you say it many times. In the accounting world, that is true, but it's much more pronounced in the HR. Knowing your audience, and your audience is your 250 employees, so it's a diverse audience. And many times, how you deal with the person who is the truck driver is going to be different than how you deal with the head salesperson. They just have different views of themselves and of the company, and you want that. That makes for a healthy organization, but it also makes for a very challenging HR department. And this point I thought was worth making. Again, you want to educate the employees on the proper way to present their issues, just knowing the rules of the game here, and they will challenge that. The employees will challenge that constantly, because depending on their makeup, they want an instant ramifications here, right? So employees troubling them, they want to get rid of them, and that's the knee-jerk reaction. Where you might have others that say, okay, we'll work with them and such, and really the right answer might be someplace in between, and that's what you help flush out in the HR department. And that in the accounting world, again, presents a challenge, and you want to make sure that you acknowledge that and understand that that is something that will take time. And clear the CFO needs to lead the charge with that. And we support many CFOs who have both of these responsibilities under their realm here, and it is a challenge for them to warm up to this dual role. And lastly, step number 6 is know when to add resources as the company grows. So we're talking about companies who are in that 50 plus employees, and now we're in that 50 to 250 range is what I had seen. Is that, once you're exceeding 50, but you're in 250, you have this kind of department combined with the accounting department. Once you get to 250 or more, they're starting to have enough HR needs where that department starts to separate a little, and clearly as you go from 250 and up, that number starts to separate even more so. So, the feel is that as that's occurring, when you're looking at your annual budgets, you want to dedicate the amount of resources there. So upgrades into technology, adding more personnel to support the needs, increasing outsourcing relationships as need be. All those things need to be taken into place as the company grows. This department's needs going to continue growing, and it's one of those things that aren't always on anyone's radar. It's one of those things where if things start happening where there's more turnover than expected, or less production, many times you could point to certain problems in the HR department as to why that is. And given the current labor shortage here, with unemployment rates at 3+%, all-time low, holding on to good labor is paramount. You really do not want to lose employees because you haven't supported them in this way. So as much as it's great to measure their production as what the accounting department does, it's equally as important in this day and age to keep them and keep the relationship going with the employee. Quick recap here, the 7 steps to combining accounting and HR departments. One is you want to select and train the department head. Make sure that your CFO is knowledgeable in the HR realm and knows where to get the resources needed and gives it the intention and the attention and the importance that it deserves. Number 2 is establish department budgets. You want to allow budgets to grow the HR department and to properly staff it. 3 is develop employee metrics and benchmarks, right? The accounting world loves having benchmarks and things that we can measure with. Use it properly as a guide, but don't hide behind that when it comes to bringing out the human side of resolving issues. 4th is develop the process. There's already an accounting process in place or many processes in place. The HR process needs its own dedicated process because it's a different set of rules, different level of compliance, so you want to clearly document it as such. 5 is leverage technology where appropriate and use it more so with quantifiable things, but qualifiable things where you want to measure individuals' effectiveness is really where the human side needs to come into play. And that ties into number 6, which is communication. You want to learn both languages there and speak the HR language and being, appropriate in certain philosophies and certain language there is important, more so than wearing the accounting hat. And number 7, know when to add resources as the company grows so that you're keeping up this department and as the company evolves, it is as well. At CFO On Demand, we help our business owners to be not just business operators, but also strategists. We want them to not be drawn back down into being burdened with financial analysis in order to make their business decisions. We on CFO On Demand take your internal accounting department, we elevate it to a higher level, and then we add the financial analytics that business owners crave and need in order to make better decisions and to be more strategists in nature. And that help grows the company. And that's what we find our role to be. So whether they're addressing HR issues and combining with their accounting issues, we help in any way that we can as outsourced CFOs for a company, especially ones that are growing and don't have the need to have a full in-house CFO. Here are upcoming webinars. The next one will be maximizing performance with using dashboards. We talked about metrics there, so that'll be a deeper dive in that area of what departments should have what types of metrics. And then following that, automating the monthly book closes here where they're looking to scale down the amount of time to close. And we have some other ones coming up, but thank you for joining this one. We're going to now hear from our featured sponsor, which is Hafetz and Associates.
Hafetz & Associates proudly serves the community with their knowledgeable team of licensed consultants in health, medical, dental, and life insurance. Hafetz invests in the best secure benefit technology solutions, ensuring clients feel confident knowing their automated benefit selection process is completed accurately and efficiently. Through updated security services, they've also simplified the client benefit process to be more user-friendly. Give Hafetz a call today at 866-99-HAFETZ. That's 866-994-2338.